This podcast is an affiliate of BCW Supplies. The next time you need to restock on comic book bags, boards, boxes, and more, be sure to use promo code FSP to save 10% on your order. That's FSP for Flat Squirrel Productions. It helps support the show too. Thank you. Welcome to Digging for Kryptonite, a Superman fan journey. I'm your host, Anthony Desiato. Joining me to discuss the state of the super titles in 2026 is Superman Group editor and returning guest, Paul KAMINSKI. Welcome back.
Thanks for having me, Anthony. This show has turned into like must-listen podcasting for me. It is the show I look forward to listening to the most when I see a new episode drop. Although I must confess, Anthony, I've never watched, I don't think, a single episode of Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman. But now I know a lot about that television series.
There you go. Man, I am so honored. And we were able to meet up for coffee before New York Comic Con back in October. And it was such a great time just to see you in person and catch up. It had been a long time, even though we talk and message. And when I got home, I was telling my wife, I was like, it was the best part of my day. It's like I had to just sit and relax and have coffee. Not to knock New York Comic Con, but it was nice to just relax, have coffee, chat. You were so kind, so complimentary about the podcast. I came out of it. I'm like, I feel great. Like, this is amazing. And I want to thank you publicly on the record. You gifted me with a custom t-shirt that says "In My Triangle Era." I've been wearing it for a lot of the recordings. You are wearing yours as of this exact moment. And I just want to thank you so much. I wear it proudly. I love it.
My pleasure. There are only two in existence. That'll be our little Wonder Twins bond. Yeah, dude, so I don't listen to a lot of comic podcasts, or I didn't. And because I always felt like, well, I kind of want to turn off my brain. Like when comics is your job, it starts to feel like work, by necessity. So I've tried to find ways to recapture like what I used to feel about comics when I was a little kid. And so one of the ways I've been doing that is just reading a lot. So I've like really ramped up my reading to just try and like get back into a rhythm of reading lots of stuff, like not that I don't work on. And then the other thing was, after being on your show, I really appreciated your demeanor. Like I appreciated how you approached topics. I appreciated how do I phrase this? the good faith and interpretation that you brought with your perspective, even to things that you didn't like, because I try and do that too, right? So like I found a kinship there, and then I became a regular listener and have since branched off into other comic podcasts, but I have not yet found one that I like as much as yours. So yes, you inspired me to listen to other comic podcasts. I love listening to your show. I love all your guests. There are some times where I'm screaming at them to no one while I'm on a run out here. I'm like, no, you don't understand. It was this. But I love your show. You have a great show.
Man, that means the world to me. Well, let me now return the favor. I said this to you when we met. I've said this when we've talked about the titles on the show, but I'll say it again. The current state of the super books as a line, right? I've enjoyed a bunch of different stories and runs and series over the years, but as a line, I feel like it's as strong as I've seen it. And it brings me back to that triangle era, going back to the t-shirt, but that era that means so much to me. And so to have this level of cohesiveness across the line where the books feel like they're on the same page, but they also can be read independently. I'm sure there's so much that goes into making all of that happen. And I just want you to know, I appreciate it. And I hear from audience members who do as well. So kudos to you and the teams.
I'm happy to hear that. You know, I'm not always, and the team is not always going to get everything the way everybody wants it, right? Like there are times where I look back even and I go, well, maybe we should have done that differently. But what I can promise you is that we give a shit and we're going to try because we actually care. Like all of us, the whole team. We do these bi-weekly calls with Wade and Josh and Sophie Campbell and Dan Slott and the wonderful assistant editor Jillian Grant and Brittany Holzer, who edits Action and Supergirl. And I think we've even recently incorporated Kathleen Wisniewski, who works on Adventures of Superman, the Philip Kennedy Johnson book. And we just really like try and plan this out and make it feel cohesive because I think people can kind of tell when you don't have a plan, you know? And we do actually. Like that's the one thing we have right now, for good or ill. We have a plan. You may not like it, but we got one.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, that definitely comes across. And I will say, when I had you on was just about a year ago. And I love that you're back here. I know Bendis has his Bendis tapes on the Word Balloon podcast. He's there all the time. I hope that this can become an annual tradition where you come on and we chat. But I got to tell you, there was a lot of interest from the audience to hear from you. And maybe I shouldn't say this, but we had a lot of big name creators on the podcast last year. And I see all the downloads. And when I tell you, you more than held your own. There was a lot of interest in hearing from you. So
don't tell Jeff Loeb. Love him dearly.
I think it'll be all right. But no, so it's so great to have you here. Now, the last time you were here, it was before Superman Unlimited launched. It was before the start of Superboy and Action Comics. It was before the road to KO and all of that. So I guess just to kind of kick us off here, as you look back on 2025 in the super titles, what's your perspective? Biggest challenges, surprises, rewards, wherever you'd like to take that. But I'm just kind of curious, your perspective now, looking back on the year that just wrapped up.
Yeah, I'm proud of the year. I'm committing the sin of pride. I think I was looking at last year at the time as an opportunity because of the goodwill around the run up to Superman. And admittedly, I didn't know how that movie was going to be or how it was going to perform or how people would perceive it. I was sitting in the audience. I saw it. I didn't get an advanced screening, but I got one of those early screenings through the Fandango. I forget what it was.
The Amazon Prime thing.
That was it.
Yep, that's what I did.
See it on the Tuesday or the Wednesday or whatever it was. So I went alone, and I sat in a theater full of nerds, all wearing shirts the same as I was, and it was a nice experience to have that communal experience. But as I was watching the movie, I was sitting there thinking, what are people going to think of this? Because it is a movie that asks a lot of you, I think, as like, it banks on the fact that you are going to go along with things like Pocket Universe and go along with things like we understand what Superman's origin is. We don't really have to explain it. Like, it is a movie, in my opinion, that does it. But it also has so many accessible elements, you know, the dog and the romance being chief amongst them, that I do think that, you know, James Gunn calculated correctly that as long as those elements were in place, people would buy into the other stuff. So, but even still, I wasn't sure, because I was like, my editorial teachers were always like, be abundantly clear and make sure everything feels like organically set up. And there were elements of this movie that felt, you know, like they were leaps a little bit. So I wasn't sure, but then it became like a cultural phenomenon. And then I was really, really happy and gratified that everybody seemed to really embrace this comic booky movie. It felt good. And so we had that advantage going out of it. But before, when we were planning it, I wasn't sure, you know, I wasn't sure I was going to hit. So I thought, well, we'll capitalize on the run up. Let's make sure that we hit the run up, because it seemed like the run up was going to be the thing. And so that's why all this stuff came out then. And I felt good. I felt like we executed the plan we intended to execute. I liked all the stories, and we've seen tremendous success, particularly with the main Superman title. So I'm very proud of that one. The work Josh and Dan Moore have been doing on that has been really great. And we've had sellouts. You know, we're entering into a period where DC is particularly successful, which I say with some distance because it is primarily due to the Absolute line leading the way, but also KO, which I work on. But there's a lot of goodwill around DC, and so I think that that's helping fuel some things. But yeah, sellouts for Superman issues, multiple Superman issues in a year just doesn't happen all the time, and it did this year.
Yeah. No, that's fantastic. No, it's awesome to see, and it's been a lot of fun to read. You mentioned the Absolute line. I actually did want to ask you, because last time you talked about the editorial structure at DC and the different groups, Metropolis, Gotham, Themyscira. How are the Absolute books structured from an editorial perspective?
They fall under Chris Conroy, who is the executive editor at DC. And Chris is the Vertigo editor and Black Label editor. And Chris works closely with the other sort of catch-all editorial group. They call it GUPPI, GPI, Global Publishing Initiatives or whatever. So Chris works with that group, and he's Mr. Absolute. But Katie Kubert, for example, is the editor on Absolute Batman and Absolute Martian Manhunter. Katie is the group editor of GPI. Chris is the editor on Absolute Superman, Absolute Wonder Woman. And then you have Andrew Marino, who's the editor on Absolute Green Lantern, Absolute Flash. And Andrew also was filling in for Katie while she was out on parental leave. So I don't have a lot of direct interaction there. I read out Superman. We were talking before the call off mic. DC has this thing where other group editors will read books from other groups to offer a fresh perspective from outside of the insular nature of a regular ongoing title. Just make sure you're not missing the forest for the trees kind of stuff. So I read out Absolute Superman, and I love it. I love it because, and I don't know if I talked about this last time, but I love it because it's just not what I would have ever done. And I love that about it because it takes me by surprise every single month. Yeah. How do you feel about it? You haven't talked much about it.
It's coming up. We got an episode coming up on it. I've honestly been waiting to have a decent chunk of it out to then really sink my teeth into, but I've had a bunch of audience members express their enjoyment and ask when we're covering it. It's coming. I have begun my reading of it, and I really do enjoy it as well. And I guess I share the sentiment. It's not, I don't know that it would necessarily be my instinct or what I don't know, would gravitate to on paper, but reading it, I really like it and I appreciate it for what it is. So yeah, I'm looking forward to doing our full dive into it.
Yeah. The Absolute Superman take that I would have done would have been more like Spider-Man-y. And that I think is a little more expected. And so I'm impressed, really impressed, genuinely impressed with Jason Aaron, one of my favorite writers. Wolverine and the X-Men, when that came out, I was just like, oh, comics are alive and well. And Jason Aaron is the guy. I felt very good about that particular run. So anyway, I love Jason, and he really passionately cares about this book. So yeah, I love it. I never know what's going to happen. And that's the whole beauty of the Absolute line. You actually don't know what's going to happen.
True. This is going to sound like I'm blowing smoke, but I'm not. If I weren't enjoying the mainline Superman books so much, I'm sure I'd still enjoy Absolute, but I think one of the things that allows me to access it and appreciate it even more is like I'm getting kind of that mainline Superman fix that I crave from the core books, and then this is a really fun addendum to it. Now, I got to ask you here. I have specific questions about the individual titles, but we're all very excited about Reign of the Superboys. And as of this recording, and even by the time people hear this, the storyline won't have started yet. It won't be out on the shelves, but we've had the initial announcement and the initial wave of solicitations. For anyone who might have missed the memo here, can you set up what Reign of the Superboys is for us?
Yeah. So after KO, the events of that ending, which I of course cannot spoil, will lend themselves, shall I say, to a reign of the Superboys, a filling of the role of Superman across the 4 core ongoing super titles. And so much like Reign of the Supermen in the 90s, which I know your listenership is very familiar with, this is kind of a play on that a little, but different in a sense. So no one's actually pretending to be Superman or anything like that. But this is four characters who all carry the mantle of Superboy or someone Superboy adjacent in one way or the other will be taking up starring roles after the DC K.O. initiative in the four core super titles. So in Superman, the main Superman title, you have Superboy Prime, who we've been setting up in that Superman title now for quite a while. And that is the one that is maybe more closely akin to what my version of Absolute Superman would have been, I guess, in a sense. That is for fans of someone who is a character who is not necessarily reverent. It's also a comic book fan inside of the comic book, which I love. And it's not quite the same as a character like Deadpool or even like Ambush Bug, because this is like specifically a comic book collector. Like this Clark Kent, Superboy Prime is us. Well, without the mass murder, although I can't
Sure.
speak for you, Anthony. But like he's us. So he gets to do all the things that we would want to do were we to enter the DC universe. And so there's a lot of fun being planned around that, which was funny because Josh was so positive I was going to not go for that. I remember I was sitting in his office. He has this wonderful office in his home in Portland. And we were on a whiteboard. We were breaking stuff. And then he was so nervous to tell me that. And he's just like, I want to do Prime. I want to have Prime be Superman. I want to have a villain in that Superman role. And I was like, great, let's do it. Let's make sure Slot's okay with it. But great, that sounds awesome. And so, yeah, we're going to do it. We're really going to do it for real. It's going to be awesome. So that's that one in the Superman book. And then in Superman Unlimited, that's one I really can't spoil too much about, but we're introducing a new character called Tomorrow Man. And we are introducing back into the book in some capacity, which again, I cannot get into, a young John Kent. And so that book is definitely going to square around what's going on with John. And it's awesome. We have a new regular artist taking over Superman Unlimited, Lucas Meyer, who's one of the rising stars here at DC. So I'm really excited about that. And we have most of that first issue done in the can. Supergirl is a continuation of Sophie's story. However, we are playing with the character Boy Thunder, who we introduced as Superman's original ward / sidekick / kid ally, whatever you want to call it, in the pages of World's Finest. Boy Thunder's legacy in the city of Kandor will be explored, and Connor Kent will be pitching in on that story as well. We wanted to make sure we found a spot for Connor, but since Connor was also part of that original Reign of the Supermen, we didn't want to hang too much on Connor, just because we've seen that already, and we really wanted to have this be a showcase of stuff you haven't seen before. And then in action, you have Superboy, the regular Superboy, Clark Kent in Smallville, who will be visited for the first time by characters from his future. And that will play into this in a major way. And of course, we have Action 1100 coming down the pike in July. And yeah, there's going to be a lot of excitement, but that's what it is. There is a Reign of the Superboy. So it's not like a triangle error where part 1 is here, part 2 is there, part 3 is there, part 4. They're 4 separate stories that will culminate.
Understood, dude. I'm so excited. And I loved reading, I don't know if it was in the press release or an article that included the press release, but this whole business about 2's company, 3's a crowd, 4's a reign. And I'm like, oh, that's great. And I guess kind of on that note, in terms of the genesis of this did it start in the sense that you or one of the creators realized like, hey, we actually have now 4 of these Superboy type characters in play? Or was it, hey, we want to do a reign, and this then paved the way to include Prime? Although again, it sounds like Josh was already aiming for that anyway.
Yeah, Josh had Prime early. So we thought that was going to be just a Prime thing. And then once we broke the end of KO, that's when we knew that this would be an advantageous time to do it, because the John stuff was already kind of like Slott wanted to do that. It was part of his original pitch, which we said, well, just hold off on that for a bit. But yeah, once we had that KO thing, we broke it at San Diego, not this past San Diego, but the prior one. And once we had that ending, it was like me and Scott and the group editors and Josh and all this, and I really had a sense, oh, that's what this is. That's what that ending is. And then we were able to sort of retrofit after. That's when we decided, well, we've already got 2 Superboy stories happening. Let's build it out. Let's do something.
I'm a parent, which means that a family-friendly comic shop is a must, and there's none better than Aw Yeah Comics. Visit one of their 3 locations, Harrison, New York, Muncie, Indiana, or Skokie, Illinois, home to our pal, Sweet Sweet Bernie. Follow them on social media and at awyeahcomics.com for news about signings, live sales, and much more. Their name says exactly how they feel about it. Say it with me now. Aw yeah. My comic shop closed over a decade ago, but if there's one place where I feel that same sense of camaraderie, it's Fat Moose Comics, New Jersey's best and oldest comic book store, led by current owner Sean Hendricks. If you're looking for something and they don't have it, they can probably get it for you. They know a guy. Visit Fat Moose in Whippany, New Jersey, and be sure to reach out via the Fat Moose Comics Facebook page. I talk about Smallville a lot, but when it comes to listening, one podcast is at the top of my queue. Always Hold On to Smallville, hosted by our pal, Zach Moore. Zach and his guests bring tremendous insight, passion, and humor to each and every episode. And while their series rewatch has concluded, the podcast continues with more great Smallville and Superman talk. Listen wherever you get podcasts, and keep an eye out for the other shows on the Always Hold On To network. Right on. Yeah, so again, I know you can't spoil anything, nor would I want you to, even if you wanted to. So I want to enjoy the stories. But yes, I will say, reading the solicitations for the 4 of them, the Superman Unlimited one, definitely stood out the most. This business about witnessing the final moments of John Kent, Superman, also Superboy. And there's this warning to retailers, you don't want to sleep on this issue. It's, feels like there's a lot behind it. I'll just say this, and then if you want to comment, fine. If not, I'll move on. It's been tough with John from the fan perspective, and I don't want to speak for our audience, but I hear kind of similar things where I love the idea of John as a kid. I've also enjoyed the stories of John as an older superhero. The sticking point has been the fact that John was aged up, the way that he was aged up, the fact that they lost this time and that John was put through this torture. And again, just speaking for myself, like it's never sat right. And I've always had this instinct that, okay, at some point this might get smoothed out. So whether and to what extent that's happening, either way, I'm here for it. But that solicitation really, really jumped out at me.
I talk about John Kent and all of this like more than almost any other character. And yeah, I can't spoil anything. I think I was listening to your interview with Mike Carlin, and he was talking, you were talking to him about why they went down the path they went down with pocket universes and stuff, and why they didn't just have it be Superman that inspired the Legion. I remember you said, I was like, oh, thank God Anthony asked the next. I wanted to know, right? I never asked Mike about that directly, although I do talk to him. But and he said, well, it was a story generator. It gave story. And I thought Mike was actually quite humble about it all and stuff. So whether you like or don't like what that writer, other editor team did with aging John up, you can never say that it didn't generate story. So yeah, I never like to speak ill of any of that stuff. I'm not one to like want to go out of my way to retcon things. Like I'm the type of person that believes that all these stories matter, and my favorite story is somebody's least favorite story, and vice versa. And also, like, it is a sign of just respect to the reader to not brush it all aside. Because when I read an era of what I would consider bad comics on another title, right? The last thing I want to do is for some writer, other writer to come in and say, well, none of that mattered. I want to be rewarded for it. Like, hey, I stuck this out. Like, you know what I mean? Like, give me something here. Because in my mind, the strength of superhero comics is that it's all one continuous story. So anyway, what I will say is that nothing about what we're going to do is, to my mind, disrespectful to that run or that decision. And I have nothing but the utmost respect and admiration for Brian Michael Bendis and the editorial team who worked on that.
Right on. No, I totally appreciate and respect that. Well, if you'll indulge me, though, one more kind of, I guess, continuity related question here. So, new history of the DC universe. You did not work on that directly, correct? Or were you? Well, tangentially,
sorta.
maybe. Yeah.
This right here, which I now have stapled to my ankle at all times. Yeah, I'm holding up the hardcover for everybody. I didn't work on it directly. I was heavily involved in the early planning because it builds from the 5G timeline. Like, I don't know if your readers are familiar with what 5G was, or I keep saying readers, what your listeners are familiar with 5G. But I had a team, we called ourselves the Timeline Team. It was me and Andrew Marino and Dave Wilgus and Brittany Holzer. And we sat in a room and argued about ages of characters and what counted. And we put everything, we put the whole DC universe into a linear timeline. We worked on this thing for months. I kid you not, months. And then it was all scrapped. But we took the general structure of what we had made for that. And that was really the genesis of the new history. And then Mark did his thing. And actually, that was just a starting point. Like, Mark really,
It's I said this when we covered it, but I was like, I'm happy that this exists. Like, the task though of putting that together, it's like I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy, because it sounds so arduous, but important. And I would imagine now to have this resource internally, not just for the readers, but also at DC, is probably clutch. Well, one of the things I wanted to ask you, I guess you might have heard this if you listened to our episode on it, but Rich and I, when we talked about it, we really honed in on the phrasing about the man purporting to be Jor-El who showed up and took John and Lois on that space odyssey. This again might be the sort of thing you can't really say anything about, but I assume that was purposeful wording in that instance. But it was just very intriguing from our perspective.
Well, I can say I didn't have anything to do with that wording. So I did hear that. I remembered when you were talking about it on the show, and I giggled a good giggle to myself. Yeah, I can't say anything about that. Although, if I had to guess, I would say that there are several. The thing we didn't want to do with the New History Project is have it be so definitive and so set in stone that there was no space to tell story. So I think my personal opinion on that is there were certain instances where Mark Waid and or the editorial team who worked closely with Dave Wilgus on the back matter built in escape hatches for story as needed, would be my guess. But I was not particularly involved in that decision. And in fact, I was the one who did the Oz effect and all that stuff on my first tour duty in the Metropolis group. So, yeah.
Gotcha.
I wasn't as offended. I know some people didn't like the Jor-El Oz thing, and I must say, I thought I liked it at the time. I'm not sure going back. I haven't reread it since. I liked it at the time. I thought it was an interesting idea. Where it went after I left with the Bendis of and taking John and all that stuff like that, I can't really comment on too much. But I thought there was some virtue there, personally. Right
on. This really is the last continuity thing. And mostly because I get asked this. And so while I have you here, and I'm not trying to pin you down here, but as far as kind of what, and we hit on this last time too, as far as what DC considers the canonical origin of Superman, in that back matter of New History specifically, both Superman's Secret Origin and Superman Birthright were cited, were explicitly cited there. What I said when we talked about it, kind of the way I look at it, I assume that generally speaking, Superman's Secret Origin is our baseline, with Birthright sort of filling in some of the gaps with that journey around the world. Is that something you would say? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, no, that's that's one of the big advantages of doing the Action Comics too, is to actually show that on the page. So yeah, we would like to make those, I think those two more or less the thing, but they're not quite because there's differences and stuff. But I would tell you this, during all the Rebirth era, we were using Secret Origin as the origin with our heads sort of like filling in the holes, West African frog style for where New 52 elements would come in. And that's why we had those 2 issues of Action I referenced when I was last on your show, 876 and 976 and 977, I think they were, where we tried to organize it a little bit and put it on the page. But this new history plus this action thing is our attempt to actually do it and show you.
Very well. Speaking of action, and I've been saying this, but this Superboy starring run is truly everything that I was hoping it would be. I've enjoyed it so much, and I'll single out specifically the recent Foreclosure issue because it's really the challenges and the internal struggles that are being presented for this young Clark to overcome. Genuinely interesting and compelling. The fact that the farm's being foreclosed and he goes to this abandoned gold mine, and it's like, this seems like a reasonable fix, not hurting anybody. And this great scene with Jonathan and Martha about him having a higher calling and not taking the easy way out. And then later dealing with the corrupt banker and finding all those contracts. And it's like, he doesn't have a claim to those. He would be stealing them. But if he leaves them, there's the chance that they'll be destroyed and he won't be able to expose this guy. And he figures out a really clever workaround. But it's been such a delight to read. I can't sing its praises enough. Like, what has been, from your perspective and just DC generally, kind of your reaction to this title? And I'm curious, I guess, from readers or retailers, like, what sort of reactions have you gotten? Like, what sense do you guys have of how people are taking in these Clark as Superboy stories?
I've been really impressed with them. I work with Mark very regularly on World's Finest and Justice League, but I don't directly edit the Action line. That was him on there was a team that I helped put together with editor Brittany Holzer, but I'm not in the nitty gritty day to day on Action. Brittany is. So I get to read it a little and be sort of surprised, which is nice. And what they're doing on that book is awesome for me. I know I love it. There's an issue coming up, which is not out yet, where it is just like, I'm always looking for an issue or something, a panel, whatever it is, to hand to somebody and say, this is what this is. And Mark wrote what is, in my opinion, the definitive statement on why Superman's secret identity is valid and not like blatant lying, right? Because like some people I know look at that thing and go, he's lying all the time. What about truth and justice? And we even touch on this a little bit in the World's Finest issue, a recent one, where there's this character called the Merger, who is Joker and Lex fused together, and they do this thing which exposes the identity, and we put the genie back in the bottle at the end of it. But there's a scene where Clark has to explain to Lois why he does this, and that one worked out well. But this Action one is really, really well. So there are elements of what Wade brings to the table in that way, which check all my boxes. Like, I need somebody to say this about Superman on the page so I can be able to hand that issue to somebody. That Foreclosure one was a great example. I mean, that explains what those roots gave him in a lot of ways. And there's, countless of those in the Action Comics issues. So my own personal feedback is I love it. I think that we're still in the process of growing Superman core fans in the same way that Batman has core fans. I won't lie, Anthony, I had that little pang of like, you don't talk about Batman, you talk about Superman. Well, Batman has enough exposure. Anthony doesn't need to do a Super Batman podcast. I love Batman, but he has organically just more fans, right?
It's only going to be monthly. The Batman show's only monthly. So
I'm kidding.
This remains the main focus.
I'll listen to that one too. It was like a gut reaction. So yeah, it's always a challenge with Superman, building more Superman fans. And so, yeah, what my hope is that this will be an introduction for people and it'll continue to resonate. And especially with this Reign of the Superboys title, that we'll continue to see it grow.
I love it. As of this recording, a recent issue had Clark and Pete preparing to go camping. Anytime those guys go camping and there's a tent, we can't help but think of the classic pre-crisis story. So wherever it leads, I'm very excited. Actually, though, on the note of Pete Ross, I wanted to ask you about this. So Superman Unlimited #7 with the Mole Men issue. I have a bunch of things I want to ask you about with that. But the solicitation for that issue mentioned good old Pete Ross. Pete ended up not figuring into the actual issue, unless I'm totally missing something. And also, is that meant to be Pete on the cover or a different character?
Here?
Yeah, that guy.
Pa.
That's Pa. Okay, so I figured it could be Pa, but the original solicitation did mention good old Pete Ross. Just a little shift in between the initial planning and scripting.
Yeah. Sometimes, we have an idea or we think we know what's going to be in an issue. And then it turns out a little differently. And Pete didn't wind up having a role in that. But there's still active plans for Pete. He's such a tricky character because, what is an ex-president doing running a hardware store? And would that mean there's Secret Service in Smallville all the time? Like when you really start to think about it, you're like, this doesn't make any sense. We're going to unravel all of this. I promise at some point. And so my hope is maybe I was just wish casting in the solicits, possibly.
Hey, I'll take it. No, but knowing that there are plans, that's fantastic. And so that issue featured the Mole Men from the classic George Reeves series. Of course, Superman and the Mole Men, the movie that then got re-edited into the 2-part finale of season 1 and all of that. But how did that make its way into that issue?
We were on a Superman writers call, and Dan was talking about this issue, and he was like, "Oh yeah, and one last thing, like I need a villain that can just be a plot function villain, not somebody that we necessarily need to invest emotionally in." And we were all throwing out ideas. I think I had thrown out why don't we do the Mole? We've never seen the Mole Men in the thing, and they were, it makes sense, Smallville and stuff. And Dan went for it. But it was one of many ideas tossed about. It's cool seeing them on the page, huh? It's funny, like.
Yeah, man. I mean, that's a deep cut, but I was so happy to see that. Let me ask you, and I'm not trying to. We're not saying that these are things that are going to make their way into the comic, but just as a fan of the George Reeves show, like, are there any other aspects of that show that you're like, oh man, like I'm a huge fan of, whether or not they would make it into a comic or not, but anything that's kind of distinct to that show that you gravitate toward?
I love that show. I used to watch it with my dad when I was a kid. And I haven't seen every episode recently, but I do watch it periodically. Warner Brothers for employees has a service where you can access certain things, and so I was able to watch a couple for fun with the kids. They're a trip, man. They're so funny. Just because the way they play Clark, he's so dashing, and he smiles so like there's really no appreciable difference between him and Superman. And so it's very much more of a transparent kind of like, we know this is silly sort of thing. And it expects you, we're talking about with the James Gunn movie, it just expects you to forgive it all. Just go with it. Go with that premise. I just love his smile. Like his little wink and a nod smile is the thing that attracts me the most to that show. It's got great pacing too. There's no other like deep. I'm not familiar enough with it. I don't listen to that.
That's okay.
George Reeves rewatch program.
Okay.
So I'm sure I would learn a lot more about it then. But yeah, no, I love that. I have an affection for that show, but not. I'm not as versed in it as I am, say, of the cartoon. Although that cartoon, I think, pulled a lot from that show because that Clark Kent in the cartoon is much more George Reeves than anything else.
Yeah.
He's debonair, he's dashing, he stands upright. He doesn't like bumble or fumble or throw anything around or anything. Like I think it pulls a lot from that show.
Yeah, no, I agree. Well, let me just toss this out there. If you ever need a name for a nightclub in Metropolis, may I just offer the Tip Top Club? It's a running joke on the other podcast because there's this investigation in one of the early season 2 episodes, and there's like, I don't know, a matchbook or something that they're looking at, and Superman's like, oh, that's from the Tip Top Club. And so now this has become this running bit about like what a party animal Clark Kent must be like. He's just so into the nightlife in Metropolis. So the Tip Top Club, if you ever need a
So I got that, and I have to work in the mountain, right? We're going to abandon somebody on a mountain.
Oh, Superman Mountain. I mean, man, if you go work that in, that would be, amazing.
I have my list. I slip little things. Anthony, I slip little things into my convention speeches. So if there are any listeners who hear me at a convention, you'll hear little subtle nods to Digging for Kryptonite jokes in there.
Hey, that means the world to me. Well, even beyond a convention speech, but in a recent issue, because by the time people hear this, a recent issue of DC K.O, we had Emperor Joker on the page.
That was a Josh pull. When he told me about that, I was like, whoa.
Yeah, what a delight. I have more on that front, but I just want to button up on the Unlimited front. So I know you've already talked about this in interviews, and this not as deep a cut, but the gold Superman and the Supermobile. So can you talk about the toy influences on those elements in Superman Unlimited?
Yeah, the gold was mine. The mobile was Dan's. I love working with Dan Slott because he has a zillion ideas all the time for everything, always. And he knows Superman in his blood and guts. So I talked to him quite a bit. In fact, I'm talking to him later today. And we have a lot of fun. But it's always around his ideas and stuff. But with the gold, we were looking at the end of Superman Unlimited #1, and we thought, that's a good ending. But my note to him was like, I feel like it needs one more punch. It needs like one more thing. Because the asteroid being kryptonite, there's no surprise there. Like we were talking about that in solicits. Like we knew, that was sort of out there. So what's the twisty thing at the end? And Dan didn't want to do it at first, actually. And I wasn't going to push him into it necessarily, but I kept seeing the gold Superman based on that cartoon, primarily because it would add an extra dimension to the story that we hadn't seen before. And no matter what books we're working on, I tend to gravitate toward things where I'm like, we haven't seen it before, let's try it and stuff. And the peril of that, by the way, is if you do too much of that, they can turn into drive-bys, right? And that's bad. You don't want to introduce something just to introduce it and then don't pay it off or follow it through or have an emotional core to it. And that is the peril of it, right? So you can't be too cavalier with it. But I felt we needed some extra. So anyway, Dan wound up warming to it and basically turned it into like this web shooter is going to run out sort of thing. And I thought, well, that's something. Like we haven't seen that. His point, which I think is a valid one, which is that, well, why would you put all this kryptonite on Earth and then automatically give Superman a way to combat it? And that's why there's that sort of time limitation aspect to it. And so we wound up in a good compromise. The Supermobile, that was all Dan. He wants to throw all these things in there, and that's great, and he needed it. Clark needed it for that mission. It wasn't just to do it. Clark needed the protection coming into the Kryptonite Kingdom.
We love digging into epic comic book runs, but what about the art of the single issue? Single Bound is a podcast series hosted by married couple Amy and Logan as they review single issues of comics, many of them starring the Man of Steel, Logan's favorite character. Listen and subscribe on Spotify and YouTube, and follow the show on Instagram @SingleBoundPodcast. Ever wonder what would happen if a person who knew barely anything about comics decided to absorb hundreds of Superman stories from all eras and media? That's exactly what Robbo is doing on This Podcast Will Never Die, which starts with all the ways the Man of Steel stood out on the newsstands in 1938. Listen and subscribe to This Podcast Will Never Die, and you'll never look at Superman's trunks the same way again. As a movie lover and independent filmmaker myself, I appreciate the importance of great, well-run film festivals, and one family of fests has you covered in New York and New Jersey. Don't miss Hang On to Your Shorts in Asbury Park, Brightside Tavern in Jersey City, Round Reel in Bloomfield, and Shorts and Stout in Long Beach. Event details, as well as submission information for filmmakers, can be found at filmfreeway.com. Yeah. No, it worked. No, I was so happy to see both of that. Yeah, I've really been enjoying the title. On the note of the kryptonite asteroid and this proliferation of all of these kryptonite weapons and everything. And correct me if I'm wrong, but the idea of all of this kryptonite being potentially deadly or poisonous to people, I don't know. Has that been fully unpacked? Is that something that we're going to come back to? Because as I'm reading these stories, I'm like, oh my God, all these people, they're going to get diseases. It's going to be terrible.
Yeah, that is a consideration. In fact, I remember hearing that on your show, and it was a helpful reminder actually about that. But there is that consideration. There's a plan around what to do with all that kryptonite that you'll see unfold this year, and I don't want to have that necessarily linger too long. The thing is like these plot elements are all well and good, but they could either sort of fizzle out into nothing and then just be like, oh yeah, wasn't that a thing? Or you could like make a great big show out of resolving them. So without spoiling anything, I will say that that has been foremost on our minds, resolving the kryptonite thing, because I think kryptonite ultimately, like, you don't want it out there forever. Like, that's a special thing. It should feel special. It's one of the things that the Byrne era was so good at, which was like reminding us what needs to be special. Yeah, I guess not what needs to be special, but what is more dramatically interesting to be special or rare. You know?
Right on. I've said this, and I think I even said this to you when we met, but in that first issue, when Superman's sort of reliving the key moments of his life, and he's talking to John, and he's like, if all I did on this earth was be one of the two people who brought you into the world, I've done enough. I mean, I tear up when I read that. And I've enjoyed the title generally, but just from the jump, that hooked me. And I'm like, okay, like I'm on board with this. So that went such a long way. You were hitting on this before when you were talking about being at Josh's office and the whiteboard and mapping it out. And this was actually a question that our pal Sweet Bernie had for you, which was how far in advance you're mapping out events. And I guess you've already hit on that. And then I guess hand in hand with that, getting very literal here in terms of what you're using: whiteboard, spreadsheets, notebooks, a combination. I mean, I must imagine there's all of these different titles and plot points and making sure everything's lining up. What is your process on that front?
Yeah. So when I was in the office more regularly before COVID, we would do all this on whiteboards, and because that was Jeff Johns' method. He had during the Rebirth era, Jeff Johns would gather all of editorial into a room once a week and hit a whiteboard, and we would break story, and he would show us what he does and how his process goes, and it was an education. Think what you will about Jeff, love him or hate him, that man knows what he's doing, right? Like. And he's a brilliant writer. So I was very much one of the people that saw what Jeff was doing there and was like, oh yeah, we got to do that. And so I would do that all the time back in the day. But now it's been a long time, and we're all in separate places, and it's all a little tougher to do. So what I do is we have a meeting with all the super writers where I have a deck. I make a lot of decks. I make a lot of PowerPoints, and it's sort of become sort of a gag, a DC gag, that if there's something I'm working on, I've got a PowerPoint about it. I make PowerPoints for every single cover I do. So I have cover program decks where I can go back and look at every single variant I've ever commissioned on any cover ever down the line. I do it because I'm a visual learner, and I need that. I need to have something I can see with my eyeballs. So we do it. We're all the writers, and I share my screen, and we go and I manipulate a deck while people are talking, sort of like everyone's sort of throwing ideas around. And then once I catch one that I kind of like, I zip it into the deck and we zhuzh it around and stuff. So we still do whiteboards on occasion. Last year we did one with a lot of the writers to break elements of KO. So this notion of Omega Acts came from one of those, where it was like a bunch of people, and I was on a whiteboard and just catching the different ideas. That's one of the fun parts of the job, actually, is doing that. You know.
Okay,
so that's mainly how it's done. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay, so on that note, I wanted to ask about KO and about working with Scott Snyder, because I've been down this road with metal and death metal, and this business about crisis energy and anti-crisis energy, and now Omega and Alpha energy, and the World Forger and the Cosmic Anvil and the dark multiverse and all this business. And I'm just curious how, in terms of working with Scott specifically, like all of this cosmic architecture, it's like, does he come in with this like fully baked and mapped out, or I guess like you're saying, is aspects of it are kind of coming together as you're all breaking it? Like, well, how does that typically go? And what's the dynamic like working with him generally?
He's a different beast. Yeah, he's a different beast. So he is always, he thinks, him and Josh, I see why they get along so well. They both have this feeling of something big's got to happen in your comic, right? Like, if nothing else, you can never say that something big doesn't happen in every issue of something that they're working on, right? So like, that's Scott's whole ethos. Shit's got to happen, and you have to care that it's happening, right? Like, but shit's got to happen. So he comes in with a lot of big ideas. KO was such a hodgepodge. I tell you, it was a very different beast, because the seeds of it started as more of like a oh, we're gonna do like a Kirby thing, and it came from a San Diego summit, where it was all the group editors and Scott and Josh and Wade. And we knew we had to have a second big hit on All In. And so we were talking about, well, what would that look like? And then that's when we started talking about, well, and again, like I'm a big Dragon Ball Z guy. So I was like, well, a tournament would be, we should have them all fight,
Wait, by the way, the last time you were here and you mentioned Dragon Ball Z, and our episode got written up in multiple places. I was like, this is amazing.
I saw that. Yeah, it's cool. Yeah, so it came from, well, let's do a tournament. Maybe there is something to a tournament. And then I started building a deck based on that and showing it to Scott and be like, do you like this? Or he'd either say yes or no. And I say, well, what about this? Do you like this? And he'd say, well, yes or no. And then he started crafting the story from that. But it was more of like, it started on a tonal editorial level, and then Scott took it from there. And it was a lot of phone calls. I remember I told Scott this the other day, but like, there's this one memory I have of, I was sitting in my daughter's gymnastics class on the phone with him. I was watching her do her gymnastics moves, talking to Scott about like, oh yeah, and then when the fighters die, they're like statues and like, so it was a lot of that, a lot of phone calls. But a lot of that came from, funnily enough, I came up with the portions of the story that I contributed to the most. I usually did while listening to your show. The name came when I was listening to one of your episodes. It wasn't by anything you had said, but it was something somebody was talking about.
Interesting.
Yeah. But so it's, but he is just he has so many ideas. And he's really talented, right? Like Jeff, he's really, really talented guy. And he's a lightning rod. He attracts people who are like that and want to contribute to him. I wouldn't ever point to myself and go, well, I've created X, Y, or Z. I would point to myself and go, I love supporting people who create. So from my vantage point, I'm my sole purpose in that KO thing was to support Scott and Josh and their vision. And it's been working, man. This KO thing, it's working like an event should work. I feel really good about it. It's bonkers, like the story's bonkers, but like people are enjoying it, right? And like we're getting these sellouts and things. So it's gratifying.
It's been a lot of fun. I mean, when I was listing off some of those pieces of cosmic architecture from the other events, my personal appetite for that only goes so far. I know other folks love it. So I didn't know how this was going to go for me personally as a reader, but I've been having a lot of fun with it, and I've been enjoying the hooks of each different round. That's really kept it interesting. And then, like we said, to get something like that Emperor Joker pop in there was really cool. I guess hand in hand with putting an event like that together, you also have the ongoing Superman title that Josh is writing that's tying into it. I guess how do you sort of balance that and make sure that the Superman title doesn't get lost in the shuffle? It is still doing something meaningful, yet also supporting this larger event that you're doing.
Yeah, we always look at the books and go, if this book's going to tie in, we need to give it something important to do. Titans was the biggest one because Titans really needed something key, something kind of clutch to do. And John Layman was just all over it in one of those summits. He's a great creator, John Layman. And he did great things with Titans, but giving the Titans the evacuation of the planet, because that was one of those things where you think enough about it and you're like, well, the heroes can't, even if they're sure that someone's going to undo all of this, they're not going to let some grandma get sucked into a volcano, even if she's going to come back to life later. That's pretty messed up. So that was well, what are we going to do? Evacuate the Earth? And then suddenly there's a silence and we're like, yeah, and we're going to do it in Titans. And that's going to be a very important place for that to be. So that's how those things come about. But with Superman, we knew we had to set up Prime, and we had to continue to pay off the Legion, the Darkseid Legion stuff. And Josh and I saw different points of view about Lois's perspective on Clark leaving to go to this tournament. I was envisioning an actual downright, honest to God, fight, an argument, a marital fight. Everybody has them. The best marriages, you're gonna fight with your spouse, not physically. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So I had this whole thing where Josh, you gotta really get into it. And there's a broken photo frame falls on the ground, and John walks in, and he's like, "Oh, you guys fighting?" And Josh is like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to see it fighting on the page. And in the end, we didn't do it, but we did have it be where but Lois, the note behind the note was, hey, Lois has to be doing something proactive. Whether that is telling Clark he shouldn't do this, or if he's going to do it, she's got to play some role in it. But the best differences of opinion, I always defer to the talent, but we know that the characters have to be doing something proactive and interesting. So that's where the different beats in Superman have been coming from. And we also knew that Eddie Barrows was going to be the artist on them. And knowing that gave Josh a lot, because Eddie has been doing the work of his career, in my opinion, on Superman. He loves Superman. And so, we knew that, what's Eddie going to draw? And we thought, wow, he would draw the fortress really cool and all this stuff. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, it's been a lot of fun. And yeah, as far as Lois's role here, investigating these lost Kryptonian archives and all of this new backstory about Doomsday perhaps not being the ultimate weapon, but the absolute champion. I've been saying this, despite coming into all of this with the death and return of Superman. You might expect, anytime I see Cyborg or I see Doomsday, I'm like, oh, this is great. I've always felt it's the law of diminishing returns. You can only do so much each time they come back. But you guys, and I mean this sincerely, you found these new pockets to explore, with Doomsday as the time trapper and this new backstory, and the Hero for All Treasury Edition that came out during the summer of Superman. This pairing of Cyborg, Superman, and Maxima. I was reading, I'm how has this not been done? This is great. So, I tip my hat to you and the teams for finding these new avenues to explore. I mean, it's really kind of reignited my interest and made me more open to seeing these characters come back, because it's oh no, you actually can do some new things with them.
Yeah, that Doomsday thing was all Josh. And by the way, as speaking as somebody who's been reading nothing but Legion comics for 6 months, or no, I'm sorry, a calendar year, I think that his instinct, because at the time I didn't really know much about Legion when he pitched it. We're going back a few years. At the time, I liked it only because it was yeah, of course, this creature that is killed and reborn so many times, eventually they would reach Nirvana. I was of course that would happen. There's some sort of symmetry to that. And I felt also put at ease when he pitched it to Jurgens, and Jurgens liked it, right? Because Jurgens will tell you when he doesn't like something. And he liked it. And so we thought, okay, well, if Dan is okay with this, we clearly have something here. But that's a beautiful little character moment. And there's, that being killed and reborn, coming back stronger or better and faster and smarter and all that. That is an aspect of Doomsday that isn't often extrapolated to the nth degree like that. So I thought that was a unique way that Josh approached that. So yeah, my hat's off to Josh on that one.
Well, on the note of the Legion, we know that a new Legion series is on the way here. I don't know how much you could say about it. I guess my two questions for you would be, why was now the right he's got the the minifig. Now, what are those? Oh, those from the animated series?
Yeah, McDonald's Happy
Oh, the
Meals.
McDonald, man. That animated series, that Legion of Superheroes animated series, 2006 to 2008. What a gem of a show, right?
First season's excellent. Second season's even better. They're both very different shows.
Yep.
First season and second season, but both rule. I love that show.
So good. And really the only other media adaptation of Imperiex in all these in all these years. Like they did Imperiex.
Yeah, you were going on about on your podcast about Imperiex, and then suddenly I'm like, is that Imperiex in this cartoon?
Yeah.
And you know what? He works in that cartoon real well.
Yeah. No, it's
like real well.
It's a gem of a show. I mean, I'm glad I have the Blu-ray complete series. I don't believe it's streaming at this moment, but I hope that people go to it because it's really worth watching. But yeah, I mean, I guess my question, why is now the right time to bring back the Legion in an ongoing title? And you mentioned having done all of this homework, boning up on Legion history. I guess I suspect among our audience, I know there are folks who are very well versed in Legion lore, but I'm sure there are others who for whom this will be relatively new. So I guess, I mean, Great Darkness Saga, obviously that's the a major hitter in that category. But I guess any other stories or runs that you would particularly recommend someone kind of brush up on before we get underway here?
God, what? Oh yeah, let's just breeze past that in 2 minutes. That franchise. Look, dude, I think you and I are similar in a lot of ways. As it pertains to our comic book fandom, I read comic books a lot in my life. Like I got into it at 8, and I haven't stopped. And somehow it took me until 39 and 3/4 years of age to get around to actually reading the Legion of Superheroes, because I don't know what it was, but I looked at that and I went, even I find this impenetrable. And I could tell you all about the Sugar Man, like there's things I could tell you about these comics, but I don't know what it was, man. But like every once in a while, I'd like pick up an issue and I'd be like, all right, I'm gonna give this a go. And I'd just be like, who is this person? I don't understand. But when we were talking about what Josh's future at DC was going to look like, he's written most of the books at DC. And so and not just my question to him, but everybody's question to him was like, what else do you want to do here? And he said, yeah, Legion of Superheroes is on my bucket list. Like that's one I really care about. And so he introduced it in the All In special. That was all Josh. He supplied all. I was completely ignorant at the time to really much about the Legion. I'd read them, right? Like I read them in various crossovers and things, but I had no idea. Dude, I had no idea. I had no idea. I was like, why are they calling him Lass and Lad? And what is this? But I was like, well, look, I like working with Josh and he thinks this is cool. Like, I'm sure there's something here. So I started reading all of it. I was just like, you know what? I'm going to do it. And I got to tell you, I turned into such a sicko for the Legion of Superheroes. Like, if there was ever a franchise that spoke to me in my core as like a Star Trek fan and a fan of like Superman, if you like Star Trek and Superman, Legion is for you. Like it's very optimistic in that way. And so I became just a real freak, dude, a real freakazoid. I read all 5 years later. I've read all. I've been going through bit by bit, reading everything, and jumping around too. I would say that beyond Great Darkness, the Levitz Giffen stuff leading to it and coming out of it, that's still for my money, it's the cream of the crop. The other stuff that I really enjoyed, I really like Wade's first go around on Legion, like the reboot Legion. I love that one. And I really, I enjoyed 5 years later. I think you have to be a fan of like 90s, early 90s, kind of like American Flag, Judge Dredd. It's more nihilistic. It's less, gone is the shining optimism of the Legion with that stuff. But I did enjoy it for what it was. It was very different, very different. Silver Age stuff I didn't totally gravitate toward. For my money, it's Levitz, Giffen together. They are the Lennon and McCartney sort of, one is sour, one is sweet. Was that a good answer? I could pan over to like all these Legion. I am such a dude. I feel like such a degenerate for the Legion.
No, honestly, it's very encouraging to hear that because you're right. I think we have had similar experiences, and I've really not. I mean, my Legion experience has grown over these past couple of years, but there's still a sea of material that will be new to me, and I will be diving in. But to hear the experience that you've had with it is very galvanizing, and I hope that I can have something even close to that. So now I know enough about the Legion to be able to ask this question. I don't know if we can answer it, but we have the OG version pre-Crisis. We have the 0 Hour reboot. We have that Mark Waid, Barry Kitson 3 boot. We have what I think fans typically refer to as the retro boot Legion that Jeff Johns brought back, his Legion trilogy, all that business. I guess then I know there was the Bendis incarnation. So as far as what's going to be the Legion in this new series, can we say what, if any of those categories it falls into or no?
That I can't get into. But what I will say is that our primary focus is to make this thing accessible. Because, you know, the even the names, right? I mentioned like lads and lasses and stuff. They seem sort of hokey. And it got to the point where I was sort of embarrassed whenever Josh would write Lightning Lad on a page or something, because I'd be like, do they have to call him that? Like, but here's where my frame of mind flipped. These are kids at their best, right? They're kids who are fans of a real historical thing from their point of view and are imitating it exactly, right? They're like, it's so far distant. It's like kids today playing pirates or gladiators or something. There was a real historical thing that was a pirate and a gladiator. They're still pirates, but you know what I mean? But what you see a child's costume on Halloween now is such a telephone game of 1,000 years that it's not going to be like there. It isn't going to make sense. They are play acting. To me, it's more like Kick-Ass, but like Kick-Ass set in the future and not so dour. And so when you think of it as kids play acting as superheroes and then getting in over their heads, not realizing what they're doing is serious, right? They think they look at these historical figures and go, I could do that too. And they're filled with piss and vinegar. And then suddenly someone gets killed or hurt or maimed or what, a building is destroyed. And then suddenly they're like, whoa, I got to take this seriously. That's a relatable concept to me, and also helps explain the names, because if they're looking at historical records and basing what they're doing off of that, then the names make sense. So that's my headspace going into it. And Josh is in the thick of planning it out. So I actually can't get into what the Legion team and all that stuff is going to be, but that's our perspective going into it.
I love it. I'm very excited for it. The April solicits will be out by the time people hear this. Do we have a release date? And
we don't have a release date yet.
Okay. Well, we'll stay tuned for that. So real quick before I let you go, we had a couple more questions from audience members. Our mutual friend, Vican Marion, wanted me to ask you, what do you think is Superman's favorite band? I'll add, other than the Mighty Crabjoys.
Yeah, right. So I don't know if anyone caught, we slipped Mighty Crabjoy's stuff into the books last summer at Jim Lee's request. And I have this memory of sitting outside reading a book and then getting a text from Jim Lee and to be like, James is so excited that the Crabjoys, and I was just like, it's so cool. I feel like Clark really got into late 90s mom van rock, like the Wallflowers, like sort of non-committal, punchy, but without a lot of tooth, that sort of genre. I feel like he would have been like, he's sort of into that stuff, is my perception of Clark's musical taste.
Okay, right on. Our pal Brian asks, what is your recommendation as the best way for readers to engage directly with DC these days? In a world where we don't have the letters pages anymore, what would you recommend?
Well, wouldn't it be nice if we had that letters page back?
Sure would.
But if you can tweet at me on Blue Sky, you can find me on Instagram. If you have questions, I'm happy to answer them there. Yeah, it'd be nice if we had a letter column back, huh? It'd be really sweet if somebody resuscitated that And, especially since we have this 2-page Welcome to Metropolis spread in all of the super books where I get to write a little paragraph and put on my pretend, like one of those old Stan soapbox things and have a little bit of a platform for madness. So wouldn't it be great if there was fan interaction on that?
So maybe we should keep an eye out in the books.
I didn't say that.
All right. But no, that would be absolutely fantastic. Our pal Martin, he always asks about the supporting cast and space for subplots, right? Kind of the harkening back to the Triangle era days where we'd have these ongoing subplots. I know Perry as mayor is something that I know I'm always talking about, like wanting to see more of the day to day. I know obviously real estate is limited on that front, but I guess is there more we might see on that front?
Yeah, Superman Unlimited has a 9 and 10 deal with Perry as mayor a lot.
Oh, fantastic!
And then we have plans because I'm rereading the whole Superman run from the beginning to make sure we're not leaving any plot threads dangling, and that was one of them. The Perry's connection to Luthor and why he's burying that story and stuff. So yeah, we're gonna get back into all that. Excuse me. Yeah, we don't want that sitting out there. I tell you the thing I do like though is I like Lois as editor in chief, and so there are no plans right now to bring Perry back in that capacity.
Okay. Right. My last question.
How do you feel about that? You like her as EIC?
I like her.
Miss her as reporter?
No, I mean, be honest. She's still getting out there a fair amount, especially now with this hologram technology that she's utilizing. And she was undercover in the Kryptonite Kingdom, right, in Unlimited. Yeah. So no, I like this new role for her. So I'm on board, and I'm very much in the camp. I like the idea of Perry as mayor. So I think I'm content with where they are, to be honest. And then my last question, this might be something you can't answer, you don't want to answer, but if hypothetically, like if you just had blanket green light approval for an ongoing title, is there something in the Superman space? Is there something where you're like, oh man, I would do this in a heartbeat?
I've had the luxury of being able to like play in that sandbox. So most of what you're seeing right now is what that is. I have wanted to do a proper, respectful, tonally accurate, perhaps slightly updated Miracle Monday comic book adaptation. That is one I'd really like to see. I have no solid plan in place now other than I am constantly, whenever I'm working with talent, I look at them and go, is this the person to do it? Because I think that more people should have access to that story, and whether we feel it justified or not, the novelization versus the comic book iteration, I do think is a little bit of a hurdle at times. I know it was for me before. I was more of a novel reader, which I've turned into. But yeah, I want to do a Miracle Monday adaptation before they rip these keys away from me and throw them into the river.
Okay, very cool. Very cool.
It really is good. And it sums a lot of stuff up about the character. Like, it sums up his relationship to life and the sacredness he feels toward it in a way that I haven't seen done in other media. So
that'd be amazing. Well, listen, I've kept you long enough. I thank you so much for your time. It's always a blast to talk to you. Is there anything else that you want to share with the audience? Anything else you want to plug? I know we've hit on a lot, but anything else that you want to say before we sign off?
Yeah, you've been very complimentary this interview, and but I want people to know I love hearing the feedback, and I love hearing it even when it's not complimentary. In fact, that helps me understand better what the readers are interested in. So whenever you have a guest on and they're talking freely about the books, that's where my ears really perk up, because I'm curious what that take is, and it makes me think about things differently. So all I would say is, Anthony, keep doing what you're doing. I think you are absurdly good at this. I am looking forward to hearing your Bat show. I know I was giving you some hassle before. You know what you should get? You should get Rob on here, the group editor of the Bat titles. In fact, I'm going to message him right now and get your ass on there. You can talk to, he could do his State of the Union. But yeah, I'd love hearing the perspective. I really do. Especially like not being on Twitter anymore. That's where I used to get the most immediate feedback. So I just love hearing the feedback wherever possible, because it can be, an isolating job at times. I'm remote here, and I need the feedback. I need to hear it. you had somebody who was retail experience on who was talking about what they felt worked and didn't about Unlimited, and there was times where I was like, I recoiled a little bit because it was so opposite of what my instincts were, but I really appreciated the perspective, like genuinely appreciated it. And I think about that stuff. So yeah, keep doing what you're doing, and listeners to Digging for Kryptonite, keep doing what you're doing.
No, that's awesome. And yeah, I mean, I guess like going back to Brian's question, not to be too self-serving, but as far as engaging with DC, I mean, listen to the podcast, submit questions, and we have the opportunity to do something like this, which is fantastic. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. Maybe we can do an expanded Q&A or something at some point, like maybe that's an idea we can do between the States of the Union or something. But yeah, whatever method is great, or just reach out. Awesome. Well, again, thank you. Keep up the great work. It is appreciated. And like I said, as far as just the organization and the management of all of this, like I said, I can only imagine what goes into it. So really kudos to you and the teams, and we'll be reading and looking forward to all of it. So thank you. Thanks, Anthony. All right. Justice for Pete Ross. Justice for Pete Ross. Always good old Pete Ross. Get that tent. Get that tent. All right. Get that tent. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, audience. Always appreciate you tuning in. Make sure you come back next week. Until then, as always, it's about what you do. It's about action. Support the show and receive exclusive content by becoming a member at patreon.com/Anthony Desiato. Rewards include our DCU spinoff podcast, advanced listens, sponsorship opportunities, and more. My sincere thanks to all patrons. Please rate and review the podcast via your platform of choice, subscribe so that you never miss an episode, and continue the conversation by joining us on social media. By popular demand, Digging for Kryptonite merch is available at our TeePublic store. Visit the link in the show notes to get your DFK shirts, hats, mugs, and more. Flat Squirrel Podcast is also home to Lighting the Bat Signal, a Batman fan journey, which applies the signature Digging for Kryptonite approach to the Dark Knight, as well as another exciting episode in the adventures of Superman, now in its final year covering the classic George Reeves series. Subscribe today. Digging for Kryptonite is a Flat Squirrel production. Key art by Isaiah Simmons and theme music by Dan Pritchard.